So, today I want to talk about whether human beings are inherently or intrinsically good or evil. This is a question that has no particular answer to it, so meaning there's no yes or no answer whether human beings are good or evil. This is a question that will always remain open, roughly speaking, and has been always open, just like many other philosophical questions. Though I will say that it is a highly debated and a controversial topic among many philosophers, dating all the way back to the ancient Greek times, especially with Aristotle mentioning that there is no source or principle of good and of evil. And essentially this question has been discussed and argued over many times throughout history, starting, like I said, from the ancient times, then in the medieval times, and leading all the way to the Renaissance era up until today, I would say. But it particularly became highly relevant and important in the 18th century, especially dealing with a lot of political, philosophical questions. And one of them is whether human beings are inherently good or evil. And there are two particular philosophers, Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Those two philosophers have different views on whether human beings are inherently good or evil, but to that question I will return a little bit later in this video. Now, to quickly define what the word inherent means, inherent is basically something that is intrinsic or essential, which is let's say an essential part of our human nature, of good and of evil, essentially. And I must also say that it is also a question of nature and nurture, to which I will also get back to it a little bit later in this video. So there are a lot of factors that have to be asked and answered before we can even properly approach the question whether human beings are intrinsically good or evil. Now, when we talk about good and evil, I'm pretty sure a lot of people know that for good to exist, there also must be evil. And this is also tied to a theological proposition, which is that if we have free will, then evil must exist as well. Because in order for evil to not exist, we also have to restrict our free will, which is something that we all desire and crave, essentially, right? So with every benefit, there comes some kind of risk or some kind of particular downside to that factor. So, for example, in order to be light, there must be dark. Very obvious, right? And we are people who desire freedom, generally speaking, I would say, much more than security. And I also understand this question that, well, if God loves us all, why would we have evil on this earth, and why would we have, children suffering from cancer and all these diseases spreading around and so on and so forth? Well, essentially, I'm no theologian, but I can certainly say that it definitely relates to the fact that we have free will. And if we didn't have free will, then we wouldn't have any other pleasures or any other lights in our lives, essentially. But that is more a theological question to that. I'm not really gonna get too deep into any religious moments here, but as I mentioned earlier, the question of nature and nurture, this is I would say, a pretty relevant matter to answering this question, which is whether we people are more nurtured or more natured, so to speak, meaning tabula rasa versus purist behaviorism. Now, tabula rasa, as for some of you who are interested in that, Aristotle first mentioned, or maybe not first, but one of the first, I would say, who mentioned that essentially we are a blank slate, that our souls, our bodies, blank slate when we're born, and that we acquire all types of information, knowledge, experience through sensory perception in this world. And the rationalists, on the other side, claim that we are already born with a form of rational construct, let's say, and therefore we just need to dig out the parts that are kind of missing, so to speak, because we essentially remember, or like we have to remember everything again because we are born new, so to speak, and that all we need to do is focus our attention to that particular moment or object, because essentially we all know it, we just have to remember it. That's kind of the Platonian approach, so to speak. And the purist behaviorism came a little bit later, I would say, and it especially grew later on, I would say about in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, somewhere that time, basically in the 20th century, which claims that people can be trained and conditioned to do anything and everything. So meaning that if you take a newborn baby and you say that he will become a police officer or he will become a doctor, I will make sure he becomes that way and turns it into that particular being, then everything is possible. Now, again, in my personal philosophical opinion, I don't think that you can necessarily train anyone and everyone to become a particular thing. But if you really condition that baby or that being from a very early young age, then the chances are definitely bigger that he or she will become that particular set of being, let's say. So if you want to condition someone into becoming a doctor, then you have to raise that kid in a very particular medical way, let's say, to become that doctor. This is the purist behaviorism, as I would call it, or as many call it. And the other one is tabula rasa, which is that we acquire things through nature, which is hence the concept nature versus nurture. Now, of course, there are deeper analysis to be made in that sphere, but this is kind of the broad analysis of this question, whether human beings are inherently good or evil, whether we are born evil or we're born good. And to be honest, I really don't know from my personal perspective whether we are one or the other, essentially. Though I must say that there was an experiment, I think from the Yale University, which tried to figure that out, whether human beings were born intrinsically good or intrinsically evil. And so they did an experiment with a triangle and an evil square. So it was done, or it was performed on little children, almost infants, I would say, toddler age, basically. And the people, the scientists there, they said that, okay, the square is going to be evil, meaning that it was like kind of a cartoon. They kind of established a little cartoon for the little toddlers, babies, whatever. And so they said that the square will be evil, the triangle will be good, and I think there was a circle one that was also kind of good. I'm not exactly sure, but I can definitely share the link with you, share the experiment. And basically, the triangle was trying to help another object, another form, and the evil square was trying to prevent that from happening, something of that sort. And what happened was that the babies, when they were asked which triangle or which form they want to be identified with, or which one they simply prefer, like, do you like this one or do you like that one? And most of the babies, toddlers, they all pointed at the good one. So meaning at the triangle, which was the good guy, so to speak. So, and they basically derived from that experiment that the babies do identify good much more than the evil, or that they align themselves more with the good than rather with the evil. And this could be highly possible, for sure. I'm not arguing that. And this is also something what now I want to come back to, the theory or the whole controversy between Hobbes and Rousseau. Now I have to give you a little bit of a context here. With Hobbes, he assumed that essentially nature, or that life, was short, nasty, and brutish, as his famous quote was spread around in the philosophical realm, while Rousseau believed that we are intrinsically good but are eventually corrupted by the society, by institutions. Now, I will definitely say what I think about those two later towards the end in the conclusion. But from a Hobbesian perspective, that we are designed to be egocentric and to dominate and preserve our dominance over others. And because of that, we had to establish certain institutions, certain forces in order to prevent us from becoming, let's say, cannibal or becoming extremely violent among each other, which is why, hence, the government is necessary to enforce security measures in our society, because we are beings who are driven by those types of negative forces, let's say dominant forces, where we want to preserve our power, our dominance over others. Now, Rousseau claimed that we are all born good, and I think a lot of people, especially the younger people in my age, or in general, I would say university or whatever, they all assume that people are intrinsically good but are eventually corrupted by nature. Now, I also see that point very well, which can be that the governments can manipulate, can enforce their propaganda upon their citizens and turn them into a particular way and enforce a certain behavior upon other people, which is fairly understandable, I would say. But I also have to say that people also have the right to choose what they want to believe or what not. And this is a matter of how strong-willed you are, because if you allow yourself to be manipulated that easily and brainwashed, then you cannot really say that, well, it's the government's fault or it's the society's fault after all. And again, from a Hobbesian perspective, he was already from the start, I would say, a little bit more pessimistic. Well, I don't want to really say that pessimistic, because it's more of a logical conclusion, let's say, or a logical understanding on that. And he already said that we are just brutish, we're nasty, and because of that, we are already from the beginning more evil, I would say, or we have more sins, we have more evil forces in us, and we have to redeem ourselves, we have to protect ourselves as well as others. And because of that, all these measures had to take place. Now, I'm not sure what Rousseau was talking about, the political government, whether we should have no government or something, like we should live all together in harmony without a government, which I think that would be a comprehensible solution, if I understand it right. I have to really search that up. But I think that was kind of the approach he was taking on more. And in the end, this question basically never got resolved, and it's still up in the air, I would say. And also, I must not forget to mention that moral codes that we have are very different in every culture. So, meaning that in every culture we have a set of parameters, a set of rules, a set of moral codes that we have built and constructed and, let's say, enforced upon other people in our society. But I also must say at the same time that a lot of the moral codes that we have are very, very, very similar to many other cultures. And there's a lot of common denominators that we have among other cultures. So there is a very harmonious moral code, I would say, among many people, yet still differ in evil and good, what is evil and what is good. So here you can clearly see that it is yet to be discovered whether it is a purely objective or a subjective matter, whether something is good or whether something is evil. Because, for example, in some particular cultures, sacrificing a particular person is considered to be good, while in some other cultures they view it as completely harmful and illegal. And again, throughout history, a lot of people, a lot of cultures have done good and bad things, and you might also question why have they done something evil? Why did World War II happen? Why did World War I happen? Why did all these wars take place? Why all this suffering, all these unnecessary deaths, and so on and so forth? Well, if you're more of a naive person, let's say, or if you're more of a lovey-dovey pacifist in life, then you clearly are going to have much more empathy for the people who suffer much more, or for the, let's say, the oppressed, as people like to put it that way, which honestly I believe today it's just victim mentality at that point. But that's a different question, of course. I'm not going to get into that right now. But I believe that personally, to conclude this whole argument, this whole question, whether we are inherently good or evil, I personally have to say that I side with Thomas Hobbes much more than I do with Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Why? Why do I do that? Well, the answer is pretty simple, I would say, or not simple, but straightforward in some ways, which is that, first of all, I have to say that it's very difficult to even conclude that question, because that will remain open for as long as humanity exists. It's very hard to pinpoint a certain sphere or evidence for one or the other argument, meaning that it is very complex to even identify or to pinpoint whether we are inherently good or evil. And of course, you can argue from many different sides and many dimensions, from a psychological, from a philosophical, theological, anthropological, whatever you name it. But you will still not really conclude anything from that, or you will not derive anything. And personally, like I said, I definitely side with Thomas Hobbes much more than I do with Jean-Jacques Rousseau, because I believe that essentially we are very self-driven creatures, and we definitely desire a lot of things for ourselves rather than helping each other in that sense, which again kind of also makes capitalism more understandable, why capitalism actually flourishes. And that definitely gonna get some critiques and criticisms on that, and I definitely believe that socialism is not the answer, absolutely not. So is communism, which is the same thing, just having a red lipstick on it. But I definitely believe that because of our self-interest, our extreme self-interest that we have, a lot of negative things can also happen along the way. But at the same time, we also benefit from each other's self-interest. So again, I can bring capitalism into that example, which is that we desire for profit, but in order to have a very profitable company, for example, business, we also have to create the best quality product that we want to serve onto the people. And so basically you serve your self-interest, but at the same time you also serve other people's interests, and you have a little exchange, meaning that you get the profit and the customer gets the appropriate product that he desired in the end. So this is kind of the approach that I take on whether humans are inherently good and evil, but this is more of a self-interest question, I would say. If you really want to talk about whether we are inherently good or evil, meaning that we're going back to the whole concept of tabula rasa and purist behaviorism, well, here I have to say that if we really want to eradicate evil, then we also have to eradicate good. Basically, that good and evil are codependent upon each other, and there's no way of removing just evil and having good, because it's like saying you want just light, but you cannot have light if there's no dark, essentially. That's kind of the comparison that I'm trying to make here. And in the end, it all comes down to moral codes. It all comes down to proper education of the people, to proper upbringing, making sure that the people understand what is essentially good or evil. And again, there are a lot of factors that come into play, but I definitely have to say that some people are probably born more evil and some people are probably born more good. And as you can see throughout history, there were all kinds of dictators and kings and queens who have pursued all kinds of various treacherous acts upon their citizens. But at the same time, there also have been a lot of good people. So we can also learn a lot from those people, whether they're good or bad. And it's definitely important to see both sides to it. All right. Well, I think that wraps up the question for today. I hope you guys very much enjoyed the question and the answer that I've given today, that I've provided with. And if you guys have any further questions, any particular comments or critiques, I'm always open for that. Please feel free to comment in the comment section down below. And as always, I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.